Imagine Alex Cole, beaming after his dream wedding in a Seattle cathedral, kissing his bride, only for her to hand him divorce papers and reveal it was all a citizenship scam with her real husband striding in. How did this nightmare unfold? Stick around. You won't believe the justice served.
Thanks for having me, Eliza. This story shattered me but made me unbreakable. I'm sharing it to show how I fought back and won, turning pain into power. At 38, I'd started to believe that love might have passed me by entirely. My architectural firm was thriving. I'd built it from nothing into one of the most respected design companies in the Pacific Northwest. But success in business hadn't translated to success in romance. My green eyes had seen plenty of failed relationships, and my neatly trimmed dark brown beard had gone through more awkward first dates than I cared to count. The last relationship had ended particularly badly. My ex-fiancée had left me for my former business partner, taking half my clients and most of my confidence with her. Then Alina walked into my life like something out of a fairy tale. It was at a gallery opening in downtown Seattle, one of those pretentious affairs where people pretend to understand abstract art while sipping overpriced wine. I was there reluctantly, dragged along by my current business partner who insisted I needed to network more. I was studying a particularly bewildering sculpture when I heard her voice accented melodic, with just a hint of vulnerability that made me turn around. "It's supposed to represent the fragmentation of the modern soul," she said, appearing beside me with a knowing smile, "though personally I think it looks like someone dropped their lunch." I actually laughed for the first time in weeks. Alina was stunning in that effortless European way, with dark hair that caught the gallery lights and eyes that seemed to hold secrets. But it was her humor, her intelligence, that hooked me completely. "Alina Petrova," she said, extending a perfectly manicured hand, "and you're clearly someone with actual taste since you look as confused by this as I feel." "Alex Cole," I replied, shaking her hand and feeling that electric spark you read about but never quite believe exists. "And I was just thinking the same thing about you." Over the next few hours, she told me her story. Born into one of Europe's wealthiest families, the Petrova dynasty that had made their fortune in shipping and real estate across 3 generations. But wealth, she explained with a wistful smile, had come with suffocating expectations. Her parents had already arranged her life, the right schools, the right social circle, the right husband waiting in the wings. "I came to America to find myself," she said as we walked along the waterfront after leaving the gallery, "to build something real, something that's mine, but my family," she shook her head, "they've cut me off completely. They think I'm being foolish, throwing away everything they've built." The vulnerability in her voice, the courage it must have taken to leave everything behind, it drew me in completely. Here was a woman who had given up unimaginable wealth for the chance at genuine happiness. How could I not admire that? Our courtship was a whirlwind. Alina was unlike anyone I'd ever met, cultured, sophisticated, but with an adventurous spirit that matched my own. She loved hiking in the Cascades, trying hole-in-the-wall restaurants, getting lost in used bookstores. She seemed genuinely fascinated by my work, spending hours listening to me explain building designs and architectural theory. "You create spaces where people build their lives," she said one evening as we sat in my apartment, her head on my shoulder as we looked at blueprints spread across my coffee table. "That's beautiful, Alex, that's real." There were small inconsistencies that I chose to ignore, blinded by love. Phone calls she'd take in rapid Italian, quickly explaining them away as European business contacts helping with my transition. Designer clothes that seemed expensive for someone supposedly cut off from family money. "I brought some things with me," she'd say with a dismissive wave. Most telling, the way she sometimes seemed to know too much about American immigration law for someone who claimed to be navigating it for the first time. Within 6 months, I was completely, hopelessly in love. When I proposed on a rainy Seattle evening in the same spot where we'd had our first real conversation, she said yes with tears streaming down her face. "I never thought I could have this," she whispered as I slipped the ring onto her finger. "Someone who loves me for who I really am, not what my family name represents." The wedding planning, however, proved more complicated than I'd anticipated. Despite Alina's claims that her family had disowned her, they seemed remarkably involved in the proceedings, though only through layers of lawyers and formal communications. They insisted on an elaborate prenuptial agreement, supposedly to protect their family assets from any potential American fortune hunter. My lawyer, Sam Davies, was a gruff man in his 60s who'd handled my business contracts for years. He'd raised his bushy eyebrows when he first reviewed the Petrova family's proposed prenup. Alex, this thing is a fortress, he said, sliding the thick document across his mahogany desk. It's designed to protect every penny of her family's wealth if this marriage goes south, but it offers you virtually nothing in return. I don't need their money, Sam, I replied, though something in his tone made me uneasy. I just need her. Maybe so, but this is awfully one-sided, and some of these clauses, he flipped through pages, pointing to dense legal text. They're almost insulting, like they expect you to be some kind of gold digger. I thought about Alina's stories of her controlling family, their disapproval of her choices. They don't know me. They probably think every American man is after their fortune. Sam leaned back in his leather chair, studying me with the expression that had made him one of the best contract lawyers in the city. Alex, I've been doing this for 30 years. Something about this whole situation feels off. The family claims they've cut her off, but they're paying for a wedding that costs more than most people's houses. They won't speak directly to you or even attend the ceremony, but they're micromanaging every legal detail. What are you suggesting? I'm not suggesting anything. I'm just saying, let me add a few protective clauses of our own. Nothing dramatic, just some insurance. I almost said no. The whole conversation felt like a betrayal of Alina's trust. But something in Sam's weathered face, the concern of a man who'd seen too many deals go wrong, made me reconsider. The memory of my last relationship's betrayal still stung. I couldn't afford to be naive again. What kind of insurance? Sam pulled out a fresh legal pad and started writing. A mutual fraud provision. If either party enters this marriage under false pretenses, for immigration purposes, financial gain, existing marital obligations, anything deceptive, then all the protective clauses become null and void. I stared at him. Sam, that's paranoid. Alina isn't. Then it won't matter, will it? He looked up from his notes. If this is a genuine marriage between two people who love each other, this clause will never come into play. But if someone is playing games, he shrugged, well, at least you won't be left holding an empty bag. The negotiation took weeks. Alina's legal team initially balked at any additions to their pristine prenup, but eventually they agreed to Sam's clause with what seemed like amused condescension. I remember Alina laughing when I told her about it. Your lawyer thinks I'm some kind of international con artist, she said, curled up against me on my couch. It's almost flattering, though I suppose I should be offended that he thinks I need to trick someone into marrying me. He's just being cautious. It's his job. She kissed my cheek. Well, I love that you're protecting yourself. It shows you're smart. That's one of the things I adore about you, Alex. You're not naive. If only I'd known how prophetic those words would prove to be. The morning of our wedding dawned crisp and clear, one of those perfect October days in Seattle when the autumn light makes everything look like a painting. I stood in the mirror of the bridal suite at the Fairmont Olympic Hotel, adjusting my bow tie for the 10th time. My reflection showed a man I barely recognized, my green eyes bright with anticipation, my usually serious expression softened by genuine happiness. After years of failed relationships and professional disappointments, I was finally getting my fairy tale ending. My best man, Jake, burst through the door carrying 2 cups of coffee and wearing the grin of someone who'd been waiting years to see me this happy. You ready for this, brother? He asked, handing me a steaming cup. Because there's no backing out now. I've seen the flower arrangements. They cost more than my car. I laughed, taking a sip of coffee and feeling the caffeine steady my nerves. More than ready. I can't believe this is actually happening. Alina's incredible, Jake said, settling into the leather chair beside me. I've never seen you like this, Alex. You're actually relaxed, happy. It's weird, but good weird. He was right. For the first time in my adult life, I felt completely at peace. The business was running smoothly. I was marrying the woman of my dreams, and the future stretched ahead of us like an open road. Everything I'd worked for, everything I'd hoped for, was finally falling into place. The ceremony was set for 4 o'clock at the historic St. James Cathedral, a Gothic revival masterpiece that Alina had fallen in love with the moment she saw it. It's like something from a European fairy tale, she'd said when we first toured it. I want to feel like a princess on our wedding day. The irony of those words would haunt me later. The guest list was smaller than Alina had originally wanted. Her family's absence left a noticeable gap, but my side more than made up for it. My parents had flown in from Phoenix, beaming with pride and already treating Alina like the daughter they'd never had. My sister Sarah was serving as one of the groomsmen since Alina's European friends couldn't make the trip. Colleagues from the firm, old college friends, neighbors who'd become family over the years, everyone who mattered to me was there. As I made my way to the cathedral, the autumn afternoon painted Seattle in shades of gold and amber. The cathedral's twin spires reached toward a clear blue sky, and I could see guests already gathering on the steps, their formal attire creating a sea of elegant blacks and navy blues. Inside, the cathedral was transformed into something from a royal wedding. Eliza had worked with the wedding planner to create a scene of breathtaking elegance. $30,000 worth of white roses and baby's breath cascading from every surface, hundreds of candles flickering in the stained glass light, white silk draped along the pews that had cost another $15,000. The altar was framed by two massive arrangements of white orchids flown in from Thailand at a cost of $8,000 each. I took my place at the front, Jake beside me, and looked out at the assembled crowd. 200 of the most important people in my life, all here to witness this moment. My mother was already dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief, and my father gave me a thumbs up that made me grin despite my nerves. Among the guests were my childhood friends from Phoenix, colleagues who'd watched me build my firm from nothing, neighbors who'd become like family during my years in Seattle. The string quartet began the processional, and my heart started racing. Eliza's bridesmaids came down the aisle first, friends she'd made in Seattle since her European circle couldn't attend. They looked beautiful in their champagne-colored dresses that had cost $500 each, but I barely saw them. My eyes were fixed on the back of the cathedral, waiting for my bride. Then the wedding march began, and the entire congregation rose to their feet. Eliza appeared in the doorway like a vision. Her dress was a masterpiece of French lace and silk worth $35,000, with a cathedral train that seemed to float behind her as she moved. Her dark hair was swept up in an elaborate style by a celebrity stylist flown in from New York, showcasing the diamond earrings, a family heirloom, she'd told me, one of the few things she'd been allowed to keep when she left Europe. The veil was vintage, supposedly worn by 3 generations of Petrova women, worth more than most people's cars. But it was her smile that took my breath away. Radiant, joyful, focused entirely on me as she walked down that endless aisle. She looked like everything I'd ever dreamed of and never dared to hope for. In that moment, watching her approach in her $15,000 shoes on a runner that had cost $3,000, I felt like the luckiest man alive. Since her father wasn't there to give her away, Eliza had chosen to walk alone. "I'm giving myself to you," she'd said when we discussed it. "No one else has that right." Now, watching her approach with confident, graceful steps, I felt overwhelmed by the symbolism. This incredible woman was choosing me, choosing our life together, choosing love over the security of her family's wealth. When she reached the altar, she handed her bouquet, $2,000 worth of rare peonies and garden roses, to her maid of honor and took my hands. Her fingers were trembling slightly, and I squeezed gently, trying to communicate all my love and reassurance through that simple touch. "You look beautiful," I whispered, and her smile widened. "You clean up pretty well yourself," she whispered back, and I could hear the emotion in her voice. The efficient Father McKenna had known me since childhood. He'd baptized me, confirmed me, and now he was marrying me. His presence made everything feel more real, more sacred. The cathedral held the weight of centuries of worship, of countless couples who had stood where we stood and pledged their lives to each other. "Dearly beloved," he began, his voice carrying easily through the cathedral's soaring space, "we are gathered here today to witness the union of Alexander and Eliza in holy matrimony, that sacred bond that represents the deepest commitment 2 souls can make to each other." The ceremony proceeded like something out of a dream. Eliza's vows were perfect, eloquent, heartfelt, delivered with just the right amount of emotion. She spoke about finding her true home in my arms, about building a life based on love rather than obligation, about the courage it took to choose happiness over security. "Alex," she said, her voice clear and strong, "you saved me from a life I never wanted. You showed me what real love looks like. You taught me that home isn't a place, it's a person. I promise to honor that gift every day for the rest of our lives, to build something beautiful and true with you, to choose our love over everything else." As she spoke those words, I thought about the intimate moment just 3 months earlier when I'd shared my deepest fear with her, that I might never be worthy of real love, that my past failures had somehow marked me as unlovable. She'd held me that night, whispering that I was the most worthy man she'd ever known, that I deserved every happiness. The memory made her vows even more precious. My own vows felt inadequate in comparison, but I spoke from the heart about the day I met her, about how she'd brought color into a world that had been painted in shades of gray, about my commitment to protecting the love we'd built together. "I promise to be your partner in all things," I concluded, "your shelter in every storm, your companion in every adventure. I choose you, Eliza, today and always." Father McKenna smiled at us both. "The rings. Jake produced them with a flourish, my grandmother's wedding band for Elena, worth more in sentiment than money, and a platinum band she'd chosen for me. We slipped them onto each other's fingers with hands that shook slightly from emotion and adrenaline. By the power vested in me by the state of Washington and Almighty God, Father McKenna announced, I now pronounce you husband and wife. He paused, his eyes twinkling. Alex, you may kiss your bride. This was it, the moment I'd been dreaming about for months. I stepped closer to Elena, cupped her face gently in my hands, and leaned down to kiss the woman who was now my wife. Our lips met, and for one perfect, crystalline moment, the entire world disappeared. There was only Elena, only love, only the promise of our future together. The cathedral, the guests, the elaborate ceremony, all of it faded away, leaving just the two of us suspended in that single, perfect kiss. Then Elena pulled back slightly, and everything changed forever. Instead of the soft, loving expression I expected to see on my new wife's face, Elena's eyes held something cold and calculating. The transformation was so sudden, so complete, that for a moment I thought I was hallucinating. Before I could process what was happening, she pressed something into my hand, a crisp, white envelope that felt heavy with official documents. Thanks for the citizenship, loser, she whispered against my ear, her voice barely audible but dripping with contempt that cut through me like ice. The words hit me like a physical blow. I stared at her, certain I'd misheard, but the triumphant smile spreading across her face told me everything I needed to know. The woman I'd just married, the woman I'd spent the last year loving with everything I had, was looking at me like I was something she'd scraped off her shoe. In that moment, I remembered her comforting me that night when I'd confessed my fear of being unlovable, how tenderly she'd held me, how convincingly she'd whispered that I was worthy of love. It had all been an act. The envelope felt like it was burning my palm. Around us, the congregation was still applauding, still celebrating what they thought was the happiest moment of my life. But I felt like I was drowning, like the beautiful cathedral had suddenly filled with ice water. What? I started to say, but Elena stepped back, her smile widening into something sharp and predatory. Ladies and gentlemen, she announced, her voice carrying clearly through the cathedral, cutting through the applause like a knife. Thank you all for witnessing this very important business transaction. A confused murmur ran through the crowd. I saw my mother's face in the front row, her expression shifting from joy to concern. Jake was staring at Elena like she'd grown a second head. The wedding videographer, professional to the end, kept filming as 200 guests tried to process what they'd just heard. You see, Elena continued, her accent somehow more pronounced now, more theatrical, Alex has just done me a tremendous favor. We signed the marriage certificate this morning, which makes our union completely legal. And that means I'm now a permanent resident of the United States with a clear path to citizenship. The murmuring grew louder. I felt like I was watching this happen to someone else, like I was floating above the scene, observing the destruction of my life from a great distance. The $35,000 dress, the $15,000 flowers, the $50,000 venue, all of it had been props in an elaborate con game. Elena gestured to the envelope in my hand with theatrical flair. Those are divorce papers, darling. I'll be filing them first thing Monday morning. Don't worry, the prenuptial agreement my family's lawyers prepared will protect all of our assets. You won't see a penny. The cathedral erupted, gasps, shouts of outrage, my mother's cry of what is happening, but Elena wasn't finished. She raised her hand for silence, and something in her commanding presence actually worked. She was clearly enjoying every second of this, savoring the moment she'd been planning for over a year. But before we make this official, she said, turning toward the back of the cathedral with the timing of a seasoned performer, I'd like to introduce you all to someone very special. The massive oak doors of the cathedral swung open with perfect dramatic timing, and my heart stopped completely. Walking down the aisle, dressed in a tuxedo identical to mine, was another man. He was tall, dark-haired, handsome in a slick European way, and he moved with the confidence of someone who owned everything he surveyed. But it was the expression on his face that made my blood run cold, the smug satisfaction of a man who just won a game I didn't even know we were playing. Everyone, Elena announced, her voice ringing with theatrical cruelty, I'd like you to meet Marco Santini, my husband. The word husband hit the cathedral like a bomb. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by someone's sharp intake of breath and the sound of my mother starting to cry. The irony was devastating. I was standing at the altar in a cathedral that had witnessed centuries of sacred vows, and I just discovered that mine were worthless. Marco reached the altar and took Alina's hand with casual ownership, like he was reclaiming property that had been temporarily misplaced. He looked me up and down with undisguised contempt, then turned to address the congregation with the practiced ease of someone accustomed to being the center of attention. "Thank you all for your participation in this little charade," he said, his Italian accent thick and aristocratic. "Alina and I have been married for 3 years. We needed her to obtain American residency for business purposes. Alex was the perfect candidate, successful enough to satisfy immigration requirements, naive enough to fall for the whole romantic fairy tale." 3 years, not 2, but 3. They'd been married for 3 years, which meant Alina had been planning this deception long before she'd ever met me. Every moment of our relationship, every kiss, every whispered "I love you," every plan we'd made for our future, all of it had been calculated, rehearsed, performed. "The prenuptial agreement is quite comprehensive," Alina added, her voice bright and cheerful as if she were discussing the weather. "It protects all of my family's assets, which means Alex gets nothing from this arrangement except the privilege of having helped me secure my American dream." She laughed, actually laughed at my expression, the sound echoing off the cathedral's stone walls like a mockery of every prayer ever offered there. "Oh, don't look so heartbroken, darling. You got a year of excellent companionship out of the deal. I'm a very good actress, aren't I?" Marco slipped his arm around her waist possessively, and I noticed he was wearing a wedding ring, a ring that matched the one Alina had hidden beneath her engagement ring for the past year. "The best," he agreed. "Though I must admit, I'm impressed you kept up the act for so long. There were moments I thought you might actually be developing feelings for this. What's the American term, Mark?" "Never," Alina replied firmly, and then she delivered the cruelest blow of all. "Though I will say, Alex, you made it almost too easy. All that talk about love conquering all, about building something real together, you practically wrote the script for me. And that pathetic night when you cried about being unlovable, I had to bite my tongue to keep from laughing." The cathedral was in chaos now. My friends and family were on their feet, shouting questions and accusations. Jake was moving toward the altar, his face dark with anger. My father was trying to comfort my mother while looking like he wanted to commit murder. But I just stood there, frozen, staring at the woman who had just systematically destroyed everything I thought I knew about love, trust, and human decency. The envelope in my hand felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. Inside were divorce papers that would dissolve our marriage before our wedding cake had even been cut. Around us, $15,000 worth of flowers mocked the death of every romantic dream I'd ever cherished. "You're insane," I finally managed to say, my voice barely a whisper. "You're both completely insane." "We're practical," Marco corrected with European condescension. "Alina needed American residency. I needed her to maintain her inheritance while living abroad. You needed, well, you thought you needed love," he shrugged. "Everyone got what they needed." "Except Alex," Alina added with mock sympathy that was somehow worse than outright cruelty. "But honestly, darling, you should thank us. We've taught you a valuable lesson about the real world. Love is a luxury for people who can afford to be naive." That's when something inside me snapped. Not into rage, I was too shocked for anger yet, but into a kind of crystalline clarity. I looked at Alina, really looked at her, and for the first time saw her without the filter of love and trust. Saw the calculating coldness in her eyes, the practiced nature of her expressions, the way she held herself like an actress playing a role. And then I remembered something that made me smile for the first time since she'd handed me that envelope. I caught the eye of my lawyer, Sam Davies, who was sitting in the third row with an expression of grim satisfaction that told me he'd been expecting something like this. Our eyes met, and I gave him a small, deliberate nod. Alina and Marco were too busy basking in their triumph to notice the exchange. They were too busy congratulating themselves on their perfect crime to see Sam Davies stand up and begin walking toward the altar with the measured pace of a man who held all the cards. They thought they'd won, they thought they'd pulled off the perfect con, that they'd left me broken and humiliated while they walked away with everything they wanted. They had no idea what was coming. Sam Davies moved through the chaos of the cathedral like a ship cutting through stormy waters. At 65, he had the bearing of a man who'd spent 4 decades in courtrooms, and his presence seemed to calm the shouting guests through sheer force of professional authority. He carried his leather briefcase in one hand and wore the expression I'd seen him use to demolish opposing counsel, calm, confident, and absolutely lethal. Elena and Marco were still reveling in their moment of triumph, accepting what they clearly saw as their due congratulations from the universe. Elena was examining her manicure with theatrical boredom while Marco straightened his tie with the satisfaction of a job well done. The cathedral's stained glass windows cast colored light across the scene, as if even God was watching this drama unfold. "Excuse me," Sam said, his voice cutting through the noise with courtroom precision. "Ms. Petrova, Mr. Santini, I believe we need to have a conversation." Elena looked up with mild irritation, as if a servant had interrupted her at an inconvenient moment. "And you are?" "Samuel Davies, attorney at law," Sam replied, setting his briefcase down on the altar steps and opening it with deliberate ceremony. "I represent Mr. Cole in all legal matters, including the preparation and negotiation of your prenuptial agreement." Marco waved dismissively, his Italian arrogance on full display. "The prenup is ironclad, old man. Our lawyers made sure of that. Everything is protected." "Oh, absolutely," Sam agreed, pulling out a thick folder with the satisfaction of a magician about to reveal his greatest trick. "Your legal team did excellent work. Truly impressive. They thought of everything: adultery clauses, abandonment provisions, even protection against any claims on future earnings or inherited wealth." Elena's smile widened and she actually clapped her hands together like a delighted child. "Exactly, so if you're here to threaten some kind of lawsuit—" "I'm not here to threaten anything," Sam interrupted smoothly, his voice growing stronger as the cathedral fell silent around us. "I'm here to thank you." The first flicker of uncertainty crossed Elena's face. Around us, guests were pulling out their phones, recording everything. The wedding videographer had moved closer, capturing every word. "Thank us for your public confession to marriage fraud," Sam continued, his voice carrying to every corner of the cathedral. "In front of 200 witnesses, being recorded by multiple cameras, and in the presence of a priest who can testify to the validity of your statements." Marco's confident expression wavered for the first time. "What are you talking about?" Sam opened the folder and pulled out several documents with theatrical flair. "I'm talking about Clause 117B of your prenuptial agreement, the mutual fraud provision that you so graciously agreed to include." I watched Elena's face as the first shadow of doubt crept in. Her perfectly applied makeup couldn't hide the growing pallor beneath. "That ridiculous American paranoia clause, our lawyers said it was meaningless." "Your lawyers were wrong," Sam said, his voice taking on the tone he used when delivering a killing blow in court. "They were so focused on protecting your assets from a gold-digging American husband that they overlooked the reciprocal nature of the protection." He held up the document so everyone could see it, like a prosecutor presenting evidence to a jury. The cathedral's acoustics carried his words perfectly, ensuring that every guest could hear the legal destruction unfolding. Clause 117B states, and I quote, "In the event that either party enters into this marriage under false pretenses, including but not limited to fraudulent intent regarding immigration status, existing marital obligations, or material misrepresentation of personal circumstances, all protective clauses contained herein shall be rendered null and void." The cathedral was so quiet you could hear a pin drop. Elena snatched the document from Sam's hand, her perfectly manicured fingers trembling as her eyes scanned the dense legal text with growing horror. "Furthermore," Sam continued, clearly enjoying himself now, "the clause stipulates that in such cases of proven fraud, the injured party shall be entitled to liquidated damages equal to the full value of any assets that would have been protected under the original agreement." Marco grabbed Elena's arm, his aristocratic composure cracking. "What does that mean?" Sam smiled, actually smiled, for the first time since this nightmare began. Behind him, I could see guests leaning forward, their phones recording every word, their faces showing a mixture of shock and growing satisfaction as they realized justice was about to be served. "It means that Ms. Petrova's public admission to marriage fraud has just voided every protection in this prenuptial agreement. Her entire personal stake in the Petrova family fortune, all of her inherited assets, her trust fund holdings, all of it is now subject to seizure as damages for the fraudulent marriage." Elena's face went white beneath her professional makeup. The $35,000 dress suddenly looked like a costume, the $15,000 flowers like props in a play that had just taken a very different turn. "That's not possible. That can't be legal." "Oh, it's perfectly legal," Sam assured her, his voice carrying the authority of 4 decades in courtrooms. "Your own lawyers drafted the enforcement mechanisms. They were quite thorough about ensuring that any fraud provisions would be immediately actionable." He turned to address the crowd, speaking like a professor delivering a lecture. "The beauty of this particular clause is that it was designed to be self-executing. No lengthy court battles, no complex litigation. Just a clear admission of fraud, which we have, an immediate forfeiture of protected assets." I found my voice for the first time since this began, stepping forward to stand beside Sam. "You called me naive, Alina, but you were so sure of your own superiority, so certain that you'd outsmarted the stupid American, that you signed away your entire inheritance to protect yourself from a crime you were planning to commit." Marco was frantically reading over Alina's shoulder now, his face growing paler by the second as the full implications sank in. "This can't be right. There has to be a way to contest this." "Contest what?" Sam asked reasonably, spreading his hands in a gesture of innocent inquiry. "Your wife just confessed to marriage fraud in front of 200 witnesses. She admitted that the marriage was a sham for immigration purposes, that she was already married to you, and that she deliberately deceived my client. The prenup you insisted on includes mandatory arbitration clauses that prevent any court challenges to fraud determinations." Alina was shaking now, the papers trembling in her hands like autumn leaves. The cathedral's ancient stones seemed to be closing in around her. "But the family lawyers," they said. "Your family lawyers assumed you were entering into a legitimate marriage," Sam explained with the patience of a teacher addressing a particularly slow student. "They never imagined you'd be stupid enough to publicly confess to fraud while standing at the altar. They certainly never thought you'd do it while being recorded for posterity." I looked around the cathedral at the faces of my friends and family. The shock was giving way to something else now, a kind of righteous satisfaction. They'd watched me be humiliated and betrayed, but now they were watching justice unfold in real time. My mother had stopped crying and was staring at Alina with the kind of cold fury that only a mother protecting her child can muster. Jake was grinning like Christmas morning. Even Father McKenna looked grimly pleased, as if divine justice was being served right there at his altar. "How much?" Marco asked, his voice barely a whisper. "How much what?" Sam replied. "How much is she worth? How much are we talking about?" Sam consulted another document with the deliberate slowness of a man savoring every moment. According to the financial disclosures required by the prenup, Ms. Petrova's personal holdings in the family trust are valued at approximately $47 million. Her inherited real estate portfolio adds another $23 million. Various investment accounts, art collections, and other assets bring the total to just over $75 million. The number hit the cathedral like a thunderbolt. $75 million. Alina had just confessed to fraud that would cost her $75 million. The guests' phones were recording everything, capturing the moment when arrogance met justice in the most spectacular way possible. "No," Alina whispered, then louder, her voice echoing off the stone walls. "No, this isn't happening. This can't be happening." "I'm afraid it is," Sam said with professional sympathy that somehow made his words more devastating. "The arbitration process will take about 30 days, but given the clear evidence of fraud and the unambiguous nature of your confession, the outcome is essentially predetermined." Marco rounded on Alina, his face twisted with rage, all pretense of European sophistication gone. "You stupid, arrogant, do you realize what you've done? Do you understand what you've just cost us?" "I didn't know," Alina screamed back, her voice cracking with desperation. "How was I supposed to know about some ridiculous clause buried in hundreds of pages of legal documents?" "Because that's what lawyers are for," Marco shouted, his Italian accent thickening with emotion. "Because you read contracts before you signed them, because you don't confess to crimes in front of hundreds of witnesses." They were falling apart right there at the altar, their perfect partnership dissolving into mutual recrimination and blame. The elegant, sophisticated couple who had walked into my wedding had become two panicked criminals turning on each other. The cathedral that had witnessed centuries of sacred vows was now witnessing the complete destruction of two people who had tried to make a mockery of everything it represented. I stepped forward and both of them turned to look at me. For the first time since Alina had handed me that envelope, I felt like myself again, not a victim, not a mark, but a man who had been pushed to his limit and had refused to break. "You know what the really beautiful part is," I said, my voice calm and steady, carrying clearly through the cathedral's perfect acoustics. "You could have just asked for a divorce. You could have made up any story that we'd grown apart, that the marriage wasn't working, whatever. I would have been heartbroken, but I would have let you go. The prenup would have protected your assets and you could have walked away clean." Alina stared at me with desperate hope, as if I might somehow undo what had just happened. But you couldn't resist the cruelty, I continued, my words falling like hammer blows. You couldn't just break my heart quietly. You had to humiliate me, had to make sure I knew how stupid you thought I was, had to rub my face in how completely you'd fooled me. Your need to gloat, your absolute certainty that you were smarter than everyone else in the room, that's what destroyed you. I looked out at the congregation, at all the people who had come to celebrate what they thought was the happiest day of my life. And you did it in front of everyone I care about so they could all witness not just my humiliation, but your downfall. Elena opened her mouth, probably to beg or threaten or try one last manipulation, but I held up my hand. Save it, I said. I've heard enough lies from you to last several lifetimes. I turned to Sam Davies, who was watching the proceedings with the satisfaction of a master craftsman admiring his work. What happens now? Sam Davies closed his briefcase with the finality of a judge's gavel, the sound echoing through the cathedral like a death knell for Elena's schemes. Now, Mr. Cole, we proceed with the arbitration process as outlined in the prenuptial agreement. Given the clear evidence of fraud and Ms. Petrova's public confession, I expect the proceedings to be quite straightforward. Elena had sunk onto the altar steps, her elaborate wedding dress pooling around her like spilled milk. The transformation was remarkable. In the span of 20 minutes, she'd gone from triumphant con artist to broken woman facing financial ruin. The cathedral's ancient stones seemed to loom over her, as if the weight of centuries of sacred vows was finally pressing down on someone who had tried to make a mockery of them all. Marco stood behind her, his hands clenched into fists, looking like a man watching his entire world collapse. The confident European aristocrat had been replaced by a panicked criminal who was beginning to understand the magnitude of his wife's stupidity. There has to be something, Elena whispered, looking up at Sam with desperate eyes that had lost all their calculating coldness. Some way to contest this, some legal loophole. I'm afraid not, Sam replied with professional courtesy that somehow made his words more devastating. Your family's lawyers were quite thorough in ensuring that fraud provisions would be immediately enforceable. They included mandatory arbitration clauses specifically to prevent lengthy court battles that might delay asset recovery. Father McKenna stepped forward, his expression grave but not unsympathetic. The priest had officiated hundreds of weddings in this cathedral, but nothing quite like this. I think it would be best if we cleared the cathedral now. This is obviously not the celebration any of us expected. I looked around at the assembled guests, my friends, my family, my colleagues, all staring at the wreckage of what should have been the happiest day of my life. But strangely, I didn't feel humiliated anymore. I felt liberated. The phones recording everything would ensure this story spread far beyond these walls, but I no longer cared. Let the world see what happened when predators underestimated their prey. Actually, Father, I said, surprising myself with how steady my voice sounded, I'd like to say something first. The cathedral fell silent again. Elena looked up at me with something that might have been hope, as if I were about to announce that this had all been some elaborate joke, that I was going to forgive her and somehow make this all go away. I walked to the center of the altar, the same spot where I'd stood just minutes ago to pledge my love to a woman who had never existed. The stained glass windows cast colored light across the scene, and I felt like I was standing in the eye of a hurricane, calm, centered, while chaos swirled around me. 6 months ago, I began, my voice carrying clearly through the cathedral, Elena told me that she'd given up her family's wealth to find real love. She said she wanted to build something genuine, something that was hers. I admired that courage, that willingness to sacrifice security for authenticity. I paused, looking directly at Elena. It turns out she was lying about that too. But the irony is beautiful, isn't it? In trying to steal my security while keeping her own, she's actually achieved exactly what she claimed to want. She's given up her family's wealth. She's going to have to build something that's genuinely hers. She's going to learn what it's really like to start over with nothing but her own abilities. Elena's face crumpled, her perfect makeup running in dark streams down her cheeks. Alex, please. I'm not finished, I said firmly, my voice carrying the authority of someone who had been pushed to his breaking point and refused to break. For a year you made me believe that love was real, that two people could build something beautiful together based on trust and mutual respect. Then you tried to teach me that I was naive, that love was a luxury for fools, that the world was nothing but users and marks. I looked out at the crowd, at my parents holding each other, at Jake standing ready to support me, at all the people who had come here to celebrate love and had instead witnessed betrayal on an epic scale. But you know what? You failed, because everyone in this cathedral, everyone except you and Marco, came here today because they believe in love. They believe in commitment, in building something real with another person. They came here to celebrate those values, and your scheme hasn't changed that. My mother was crying again, but these were different tears, proud tears, I thought. Around the cathedral, I could see guests nodding, their faces showing a mixture of anger at what had been done to me and admiration for how I was handling it. You didn't teach me that love is naive, I continued, my words falling like hammer blows in the sacred space. You taught me that I was right to protect myself, right to listen to people who care about me, right to be careful with my trust. You taught me that real love is so valuable that people will go to extraordinary lengths to fake it. I turned back to Elena, who was staring at me with something between hatred and desperation. The woman who had once seemed so sophisticated, so worldly, now looked small and pathetic in her expensive costume. And you taught me that I'm stronger than I thought I was, strong enough to survive being betrayed by someone I loved, strong enough to stand here and not be destroyed by your cruelty, strong enough to walk away from this with my dignity intact while you face the consequences of your choices. Marco stepped forward, his face dark with rage, all pretense of European sophistication abandoned. You self-righteous, this isn't over, we'll find a way to fight this. You'll what? Sam Davies interrupted mildly, his voice cutting through Marco's bluster like a scalpel. File an appeal with the arbitration board that your own prenup established. Contest a fraud determination based on your wife's voluntary confession. Claim that $75 million isn't adequate compensation for deliberate emotional and financial harm. Marco's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. The full reality of their situation was finally sinking in. They had created their own trap and walked into it with their eyes wide open. The beauty of this situation, Sam continued, addressing the crowd as if he were delivering a lecture to law students, is that it's entirely self-contained. The Petrova family lawyers created an airtight system designed to protect their assets from any conceivable threat. They just never imagined that the threat would come from their own daughter's arrogance. Elena struggled to her feet, her wedding dress torn from sitting on the stone steps. The $35,000 gown was ruined, just like everything else about this day. My family will never allow this. They'll find a way. Your family will cut their losses, Sam replied bluntly, his words hitting her like physical blows. They're business people. They'll recognize that fighting this would cost more in legal fees than they'd recover, assuming they could win, which they can't. Better to sacrifice one foolish daughter's inheritance than risk exposing the entire family fortune to scrutiny. The truth of that statement hit Elena like a physical blow. Her family had already disowned her once for leaving Europe. They certainly wouldn't risk their empire to save her from the consequences of her own stupidity. The realization showed on her face she was truly, completely alone. I walked over to where my parents were sitting and kissed my mother on the cheek. I'm sorry your day was ruined, I said softly. Oh, sweetheart, she whispered, squeezing my hand. I'm so proud of you, so proud of how you're handling this. My father stood and pulled me into a fierce hug. That woman never deserved you, he said gruffly, and now everyone knows it. Jake appeared at my side, grinning despite the circumstances. Dude, I have to ask, did you plan this? I shook my head. I hoped I'd never need it, but Sam insisted on that clause, and I'm grateful he did. Your lawyer is officially my new hero, Jake declared. Remind me never to play poker with him. Around the cathedral, guests were beginning to file out, some stopping to offer words of support, others simply nodding respectfully as they passed. The mood was strange, not celebratory obviously, but not entirely somber either. There was a sense of justice being served, of a wrong being righted in the most poetic way possible. Elena and Marco remained at the altar, both looking shell-shocked. The wedding videographer, bless his professional soul, was still filming everything, footage that would no doubt prove invaluable during the arbitration process and would probably end up going viral within hours. I walked back to where they stood and looked at Elena one last time. She was still beautiful, still elegant even in her ruined wedding dress, but I could see her clearly now. See the calculation behind her eyes, the practiced nature of her expressions, the way she held herself like an actress who'd forgotten she was still on stage. Goodbye, Elena, I said simply. I hope you learn something from this. I hope you figure out how to build a real life, an honest life. For what it's worth, I think you're capable of it if you ever decide to try. She looked up at me with something that might have been genuine emotion for the first time all day. Alex, don't, I said gently but firmly. Whatever you're about to say, don't. We're done, completely, finally done. I turned and walked down the aisle past the empty pews and the scattered rose petals toward the cathedral doors and whatever came next. Behind me, I could hear Alina starting to cry, real tears this time, not the practiced performance she'd given during our fake vows. But I didn't look back. I'd spent a year of my life looking at Alina Petrova, believing in her, loving someone who had never really existed. I was done looking back. As I reached the doors, I could hear the guests following, their voices mixing with the sound of phones buzzing as the story began to spread across social media. By tomorrow, the whole world would know what happened when a con artist tried to humiliate her mark and ended up destroying herself instead. It was, I realized, exactly the kind of justice Alina would have appreciated if she'd been on the other side of it. 3 months later, I sat in Sam Davies' office, reviewing the final arbitration documents. The mahogany conference table was covered with legal papers, financial statements, and asset transfer agreements, the paperwork that officially made me one of the wealthiest men in Seattle. Sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating what felt like the closing chapter of the strangest period of my life. $73.2 million, Sam announced, sliding the final settlement across the table with the satisfaction of a master craftsman completing his greatest work. After arbitration fees and various administrative costs, the arbitrator actually awarded you additional damages for the public humiliation factor. I stared at the number, still barely able to process it. The figure represented more money than I'd ever dreamed of having, but it also represented something else, proof that justice could prevail even against the most elaborate schemes. This doesn't feel real, I admitted. It's real, Sam assured me, leaning back in his leather chair with the satisfaction of a job well done. The Petrova Family Trust has already begun the asset transfers. Real estate holdings in 3 countries, investment portfolios, art collections, it's all yours now. The arbitrator was particularly impressed by the clarity of the fraud evidence. Your wife's public confession made it the most straightforward case he'd ever seen. What about Alina? Sam's expression grew more serious and he consulted a file on his desk. She's struggling. The family cut her off completely after the arbitration ruling. Apparently her father issued a statement disowning her and removing her from all family business interests. The Petrova patriarch was quoted as saying she had brought shame upon generations of honorable business dealings. I felt a complicated mix of emotions. Justice, yes, but also something that might have been pity. Alina had destroyed my life, but watching someone lose everything, even someone who deserved it, wasn't as satisfying as I'd expected. She's living in a studio apartment in Belltown, Sam continued, working as a hostess at an upscale restaurant downtown. From what I hear, she's actually working hard, staying out of trouble, maybe learning what honest work feels like for the first time in her life. Good, I said and meant it. I hope she builds something real this time. And Marco fled back to Italy about 6 weeks ago, filed for divorce the moment he landed in Rome. Turns out his own family wasn't too pleased with his role in this scheme either. The Santinis have their own reputation to protect. Sam studied me with the expression I'd come to recognize as his concerned lawyer look. Alex, you know you don't have to feel guilty about this, right? She made her choices. She could have divorced you quietly and walked away with her inheritance intact. She chose cruelty, and cruelty has consequences. I know, I replied. I don't feel guilty. I hope she learns from it. I hope this teaches her something about the value of honesty. The truth was, I felt lighter than I had in months. Not because of the money, though I'd be lying if I said financial security wasn't nice, but because I'd proven something to myself. I'd survived betrayal, public humiliation, and the destruction of everything I thought I wanted, and I'd come through it stronger. My phone buzzed with a text from Jake. Dinner tonight? Sarah's cooking, and she wants to hear all about your meeting with the financial advisor. Also, Rachel asked if you're still on for hiking this weekend. I smiled, typing back, absolutely, to dinner. Tell Sarah I'll bring wine, good wine, and yes, tell Rachel I'm looking forward to the hike. It was strange how quickly life had returned to normal, or rather, how quickly I'd built a new normal. The first few weeks after the wedding had been difficult, dealing with the media attention, the endless questions from friends and acquaintances, the process of canceling a honeymoon and returning wedding gifts. But gradually, the circus had died down and I'd been able to focus on rebuilding. My architectural firm was busier than ever. Apparently, being the victim of an elaborate con game had made me something of a local celebrity, and clients were lining up to work with the guy who outsmarted the international marriage scammer. I'd hired 3 new architects and was considering opening a second office in Portland. More importantly, I'd started dating again. Nothing serious yet, I was taking things slowly, being more careful with my trust, but I'd met a few interesting women. Rachel was a pediatric nurse who made me laugh until my sides hurt and who shared my love of outdoor adventures. Carmen was a fellow architect who was passionate about sustainable design and had ideas that challenged my own thinking. Bate was a literature professor who could discuss everything from Proust to Stephen King with equal enthusiasm and had introduced me to authors I'd never considered. None of them were Alina. They were real, flawed, honest, genuine people building real lives, and that felt like a gift after a year of loving a carefully constructed illusion. My phone rang, interrupting my thoughts. The caller ID showed my mother's number. "Hi, Mom." "Hi, sweetheart, how did the meeting go?" "Good, everything's finalized. Sam says I'm officially rich now." She laughed, the sound warm and familiar. "Well, you were always rich in the ways that mattered. Now you're just rich in money too." "How are you and Dad doing?" "We're wonderful. Your father's been telling the story of your wedding to anyone who will listen. He's turned it into this epic tale of good triumphing over evil. You should hear his version. You're practically a superhero." I grinned. "And how's your version?" "More accurate," she said dryly, "but equally proud. You handled that situation with more grace and dignity than anyone could have expected. We're so proud of the man you've become." "Thanks, Mom. That means everything." "Are you happy, Alex? Really happy?" I considered the question seriously. Was I happy? I was successful, financially secure beyond my wildest dreams, surrounded by people who loved me. I'd survived the worst betrayal imaginable and come out stronger. I was building a new life based on honesty and real connections. "Yeah," I said, surprising myself with how certain I sounded. "I really am." "Good, that's all we ever wanted for you." After we hung up, I sat in Sam's office for a few more minutes, looking out at the Seattle skyline. The city looked different now, brighter, full of possibilities. Alina had tried to teach me that the world was dark, that people were fundamentally selfish, that love was a game for fools. She'd been wrong about all of it. The world was complicated, yes. People could be selfish and cruel, absolutely. But they could also be loyal, generous, and brave. Love was risky, but it was also real and worth the risk. I'd learned to be more careful, more discerning, but I hadn't let Alina's betrayal close my heart entirely. I gathered up the legal documents, shook Sam's hand, and headed home to get ready for dinner with my family. Tomorrow, I had a date with Rachel. We were going hiking in the Cascades, something Alina would never have done because it might have messed up her manicure. As I walked through downtown Seattle, I found myself thinking about Alina's new life. According to Sam's investigator, she was working 12-hour shifts at the restaurant, living in a studio apartment that cost more than half her minimum wage salary, learning to navigate public transportation for the first time in her privileged life. It was a harsh lesson, but maybe a necessary one. I hope she was learning what I'd learned, that the best revenge isn't cruelty, it's building something beautiful with the pieces of your broken life. And if she never learned that lesson, well, that was her choice to make. I'd made mine. I was choosing hope, choosing trust, choosing to believe that real love was possible, even after being betrayed by fake love. I was choosing to build something authentic and lasting, surrounded by people who valued honesty over cleverness, kindness over cruelty. Alina had tried to destroy me, but she'd actually done me a favor. She'd forced me to discover how strong I really was, how much I was truly worth, and how many people genuinely cared about me. She'd also made me $73 million richer, which didn't hurt. For that lesson, expensive as it had been for her, I was almost grateful. Almost. The sun was setting over Elliott Bay as I walked home, painting the sky in shades of gold and amber. It was going to be a beautiful evening for dinner with family, for laughter and honest conversation, for building the kind of life worth living. The kind of life Alina had never understood, but that I was finally free to pursue. And that felt like justice enough. As I reached my building, I pulled out my phone and looked at the photos from my recent dates with Rachel, hiking pictures, candid shots from dinner, moments of genuine laughter and connection. Real moments with a real person who valued honesty and authenticity. Alina had taught me to be more careful with my heart, but she hadn't taught me to close it. The difference between caution and cynicism was the difference between wisdom and bitterness, and I was determined to choose wisdom. Tomorrow was a new day, full of possibilities I was finally ready to embrace. And for the first time in over a year, I was genuinely excited to see what came next.
Alex, thank you for bravely recounting your ordeal. It's a stark reminder that foresight in love can shield us from deceit and flip the script on manipulators. This tale highlights how trusting our instincts and preparing for betrayal can foster resilience and real connections amidst universal heartbreaks. I'm Eliza Quinn, and remember, veils off, justice on.